the last little bit of information that we have from Chapter 9 that we haven't covered yet, and I realize we've spent, I guess this is our 4th class day on Chapter 9 because it's such a huge, it's got such huge topics in there. We've got to talk about, you know, the economics of a family unit, like we did in class on Wednesday of last week, and how significant kinship is and how different it is from the way that maybe we were born thinking of it. And also how different maybe the definition of marriage is that we're going to get today in anthropology class. You know, we should have called our state and federal senators and congressmen and congresspeople because today in anthropology class we're going to define marriage, and you know it could be over with for them if they just took our marriage definition and ran with it. But in anthropology, when we define marriage, we have to do it in really general terms that will encompass or include all of the possibilities for marriage unions that we can find in the world. And there are lots of possibilities for marriages that we can find in the world. So, yeah, so here goes. Here's our definition of marriage. Marriage is the union that is culturally defined to include sexual relationships between men and women, or sexual relationships between adults, is how we should say it. Also, the relationship that the sexual relationships create with the children that are produced, or the children that are cared for. And the relationship of the kin groups that are joined when marriages take place. Let's see what kind of run-on sentence I got on the board with this one. Okay, so it's a union. So marriage is a union. It's a culturally recognized union, culturally defined union. And typically, the customs that are associated with identifying a relationship as a marriage, it involves a sexual relationship that adults engage in. Now, in some cases, adult means something different from one society to the next. For instance, in a lot of places around the world, a female is an adult when she begins menses. Who knows what the word menses means? Menstruation, yes. So everyone knows, raise her hand in the background. So yes, so for guys in the room who maybe haven't heard this word before, menses means menstruation, when a girl begins to have her period. So that's around, what, 11, 12, 13? In some cases in the United States, the age is getting younger and younger and younger, but we define childhood as 18 or younger, right? And so even though people 18 or younger in the United States get married occasionally, they have to have like special consideration or special permission or something, special legal situation in order to be allowed to do so. You know, to enter into that contract, so to speak.
Can't you get married by yourself whenever you're 18?
So, yeah, if you're an adult in this country, you don't have, the cultural definition of adult is 18, and so you don't have to have anybody else's consent or special, like, legal permission to do so. You're able to make that contractual agreement on your own, right? Just like you're able to make other contractual agreements at 18 also. So yeah, so in the United States, marriage is a contract. It's a contractual legal agreement, so the cultural definition or the cultural custom associated with a marriage is something on paper that you have to get in the United States. Other places too. In Europe, it's the same way. You have to get a marriage license. You have to get married by somebody who is licensed to officiate such a ceremony, licensed through the state. Anybody? That's right. I asked y'all who's married. I know you're married, and Ian, you said you are married or you're divorced.
Yes.
So the three of us are married. Anybody else married in here or divorced ever? No. Okay, so just the three of us. I don't know how long ago it's been since y'all got married. I didn't have any of this gray hair when I got married, so I don't know how much marriage licenses cost these days. It was like $60 or $80 or something. Does that sound right?
I was 8 years ago, so.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, it's like $60 or $80 or something like that. I think it varies from county to county, but our cultural definition of marriage in this society is a legal arrangement. And there's a whole bunch of reasons why. Other societies, however, that don't have the same kind of legal system as ours, marriage is not something that is defined culturally with some kind of legal document or legal situation. It's just if the group of people, if the kinship group says it's a marriage, then it's a marriage, right? So sometimes that's the culture, the way the cultural custom defines which type union is considered a marriage, okay? Also remember, I've got this word adult in here, but what does adult really mean? If a female is 13 and has her first menstrual cycle, this in a lot of places classifies her as someone who is an adult ready to be married. So this word adult is, again, another one of those words that we have to, really understand what the heck this means. For us, 18.
How about for male?
Do what, for males?
Yeah.
Okay, so when we get to chapter, let me see, what chapter is this? This is 9. When we get to chapter 10 about gender, the answer, I'm still not going to be able to answer your question when you say, like, how old does a male have to be before a male is considered a man? Because what tends to happen for men is you have to experience a series of trials, so to speak. It's called a rite of passage, rite meaning rituals and ceremonies. Yeah, so around the world we're going to look at several different of these, but for a man, it's called a manhood puzzle. We'll talk about this in chapter 10. But there seems to be this association with manhood as being able to endure intense physical pain, being able to handle, some kind of endurance test, and be able to come out, and handle more, be able to take on maybe some kind of threat of war or something like this, be able to endure the pain of circumcision possibly, with everybody's eyes on you while it's happening, right, of a certain age. So and in some cultures, you can, if you go through a rite of passage and you're 10 years old, and you complete the last rite of passage that says you're a man, then guess what, you're a man. And you might have been in the same male initiation class with somebody who's 43. And the 10-year-old and the 43-year-old become a man at the same time. So it's really, in these cases, it's not so much about age. The only reason I mention age with females is because biologically there is that age where menstruation, starts. Mm-hmm. And so pretty much universally around the world, you would see that age as the starting point where not only would you get married, but many people would send you to actually live as a wife with your husband at that age also. So yeah, so the word adult here is loosely defined. So it includes the sexual relationships that adults engage in that the culture says forms a union. Sometimes, here's a shocker, sometimes adults engage in sexual relationships, but the culture doesn't say that's a marriage, right? Here's a shocker. Yeah, so if the culture says this is a marriage, then it's a marriage, right? So yeah, so adults engage in sexual relationships all the time, and it's not considered a marriage. But if the union is designated a marriage by the cultural custom, then it's a marriage. What happens in marriages? Children are often produced. Sometimes children, like we did the Brady Bunching class on, didn't we draw the Brady Bunching class on Wednesday? So yeah, sometimes children are brought into the situation from other sources. But if the adults agree to take care of those children from other sources, whether it's their own from other marriage unions or whether it is a group of street children that you decide to adopt, it does not matter. If you're caring for those children, the marriage also identifies those children by your bloodline that we've been focused on so much. Matrilineage, patrilineage, or bilateral descent like in our pattern, right? Okay. But also here is a key thing to remember. Kinship groups. The kinship groups of the people are united. Now, those of us, there's 3 of us, those of us in this room who have been married, who are married or have been married before, do not answer the following question, okay? Keep your mouths shut. But for those of you who are not married, I want to see what your knowledge is about the cultural definition of the kinds of relationships that are considered marriages in the United States. In the United States, how many people actually get married when a marriage takes place?
Entire families.
I have a vote for 2. I have a vote for what?
Entire families,
Entire
because you're not
families?
just marrying that person. You're,
Entire families, because you have in-laws.
yeah.
In-laws, here we go. Here is a legal term called an in-law, right? Absolutely, the affinal kin. And Lucas, spoken just like somebody who's never been married before. It's not just 2 people in the United States. Well, let me see. I think, actually, one of my sociology classes figured this out one time. The only way a marriage in the United States would ever be just 2 people in it is if both of you were orphans, only children orphans, neither of you had any friends, you were sterile so you couldn't ever produce any children, and you lived like in the Alaskan tundra someplace where you were never going to interact with anybody. Then maybe there's just like 2 people in your, I think those were the qualifications, to have just 2 people, but absolutely right. Very insightful for a single man. Absolutely, you marry the kinship group, even in a society like ours, where we have this inclination, oh, it's just 2 people in a marriage.
So it's like a Greek marriage where they like, well, I mean,
Oh, like the movie?
yeah, where everyone's involved, where they partake in everything. It's like you're marrying the whole family. It's like, get away from.
Yeah, that's kind of, yes, you just described my life, and I am not Greek. But yes, you absolutely just described every marriage in the United States when you have lots of siblings and lots of stepchildren and lots of children of your own and, you know, in-laws of right and left and all this. Absolutely. All of those people are in your marriage all the time. You have friends, you call up friends on the phone, do you believe what my husband just did? Can you believe this? Oh, well, if I were you, I would, blah, blah, blah. Right? Constantly you're having so much input, whether you solicit it or not, you have so much input from the people around you about your marriage. So this last part of the definition of marriage is something that sometimes my American students will say, what do you mean it joins the kinship groups? And that they are united when marriages take place. Absolutely, the kinship unit. In our culture, of course, it's a bilateral descent system, so people on both the mother's side and the father's side are united. But in other parts of the world where you only inherit your bloodline from either that matrilineage or the patrilineage, the kinship groups are still united, and that's how they make the basis. That's how they decide the basis for the marriages to begin with. Like who's going to get married.
Sometimes that's the particular reason people do get married, is to unite 2 kinship groups.
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yes, you said it more concisely, but that's exactly what I just said. Yeah. Yeah, so let's talk about this for just a second. And actually there's a term I'm sure that you've heard of before that we'll talk about next. And that is arranged marriages. Ooh, it's a different color. Arranged marriage. Okay, what happens in an arranged marriage?
The parents tell you who you're going to marry.
Okay, parents, I hear this word parents tell you who you're going to marry. This is not entirely wrong, but it's not entirely accurate either.
Kind of whoever the head of the household is.
It's whoever the head of the kinship group is, right? So last week we learned, and maybe the week before, I don't remember, all these weeks are running together. But last week, I think it was, we learned the difference between a pater and a genitor. And we learned about how sometimes people can even have multiple maters, because mater has a biological distinction and also a social distinction, right? And so to say parents choose who the individuals are going to marry is not entirely false, but it's not precisely accurate either, because who are the parents, right? Because we've already talked about parallel cousins and how the best word that defines that is sibling. For people in the United States, they all live in the same household because of patrilocality or matrilocality. And so how many daddies do you have and how many mamas do you have, right? So there begs the question, just like we have to answer the question, what does adult mean? If marriages unite adults in these sexual unions that are, socially recognized as marriages, what then does parent mean, right? So when you look at all these different ways to design society around the world, the parent is an accurate statement only when you know how many big mamas and big daddies and little mamas and little daddies there are in the kinship scheme, right? Okay, so the arranged marriage, arranged marriages take place for a variety of reasons. So this is more an explanation of arranged marriage rather than like a strict definition. But arranged marriages take place for the specific purpose of uniting kinship groups in some kind of common goal, okay? Uniting kinship groups in a common goal. This marker is also close to dead. Find an empty card?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay. So this is one of the main reasons I switched this unit around, this chapter around from the order that textbook author puts it in, is because kinship is where it all begins. Okay. So yes, we get our bloodline through the people who are produced typically through marriage unions, although not always. But it is through our kinship unit that most of these kinds of economic decisions, like marriage, is made. Now, or are made, whatever the correct English is there. So it's an economic decision to wed, whether you are in a culture like ours, that we choose our own marriage partners, or you're in a culture like the Maasai, where they have arranged marriages. It's an economic decision to wed, and that's why arranged marriages are actually the most common marriage pattern in the world. Does anybody know what percentage, or does anybody, I didn't ask you to prep for this, but around the world, arranged marriages are the most common type, or the most common reason that marriages take place. Does anybody want to take a guess what percentage of the world's cultures actually practice arranged marriages?
70.
Go higher.
90.
It's 93% of the world's cultures actually practice.
And what's the divorce
arranged
rate for
marriage.
those 98%? Or
Very low, extremely low.
Gosh, maybe I need to tell my kids who to marry. Maybe they'll be happy.
Extremely low. Well, you know what? The problem is, in our culture, we don't rear our offspring with the knowledge that this is going to happen, and there's so many other experiences that they have in their enculturation process that we don't grow up with this knowledge that this is how it's going to be for us. And so we have a completely different attitude about marriage altogether. So no, sorry, it won't work in just your one little household in America unless everybody else in America did it too, right? And then that's what the storybooks were in kindergarten class. If the storybooks were about arranged marriages that the kindergarten teacher reads to the little kids. If the Disney movies ended in, and daddy and mommy arranged a marriage for Cinderella instead of they lived happily ever after, right? Then maybe we could talk about, completely changing the system. But no, 93% of the world's cultures practice it. Now, you're also asking me this question about divorce with the assumption that, at least I'm making the assumption, tell me if this is a correct assumption, that when people are unhappy, automatically divorces should take place. And I don't mean to imply that 93% of the world are happy in their arranged marriages.
Oh, no, of course not.
Because marriage doesn't mean happily ever after, like Cinderella and Sleeping
It's
Beauty
actually
and
quite a
whatever
rare
else.
occurrence.
Exactly. Actually, yes, you're right. Yes. So anyway, yeah, so it's an economic decision most often, marriages. And when marriages are successful in the long haul, it's usually economic reasons why marriages stay together,
That's
even
because
when...
they base their marriages on business and we base our marriages on love.
That's what I'm trying to do with
Well,
mine.
and we think
Yeah.
about the love thing. You're right. I mean, we think about the love thing as like, oh, this is what I need to base my marriage on, but it's still the rent is still due, and you still need, you know what I mean? You know, and you still need some, you know, to call the general for some car insurance, and you still need all these, you know. So we think, oh, I love you, and you love me, we're gonna live happily ever after. Okay, who's buying the groceries? Right, so it's still a whole bunch of economic participation, you know, that we're talking about in this household. Yes, sir.
I heard that from people that had arranged marriages that wound up being happy after so many years is there was a mutual respect and it grew from there because somebody did
You hear
something
stories like that so often
Yeah.
about arranged
They met
marriages
each other
ending up.
Yeah.
Ending up with like deep. As a matter of fact, my best friend is in an arranged marriage, and we're going to celebrate my 10th wedding anniversary and her 30th wedding anniversary in November, and I always want to throw up a little bit in my mouth whenever I see them because they're like all over each other. You know, I mean, they like love each other so deeply now. But for like the first 5 years, I've known her the entire length of their marriage. For the first 5 years, it was like, oh, I can't wait to get away from this guy, right? But it took. Yeah, but it was her culture. She was prepared to be married to the person who her parents decided on for her, and so she stuck it out, and she was very unhappy originally, but now very, very pleased with the situation. Yes, sir.
Do cultures like the Maasai actually allow things like divorce?
Oh yeah, divorces exist around the world,
Oh, so they
but
don't
it's
get,
just
like,
not
shunned?
very common because there's more pressure on you. Okay, so let's talk about this economic decision here. Okay, so I've tried to avoid putting like a huge big kinship diagram on the board over here, but yeah. So if you have a marriage, and so many of you pointed out those cross cousin marriages that we had depicted on the board in those kinship diagrams. If you have a marriage like that, someone else, the paters and the maters, have decided who is your spouse going to be. We have not decided this based on your input whatsoever. Oh, I like the looks of that one over there. Arrange it with. We have not consulted you. We have not decided based on how we think you or your future spouse is going to feel about the situation. We've decided on what is the continued economic benefit of both of our kinship units. So for instance, in the United States, we want things legal. We have marriage licenses. We have a licensed practitioner who is supposed to oversee our legal marriage. There are certain phrases that have to be said. The power vested in me by the state of Arkansas, I pronounce you blah, blah, right? So, so we have this precise procedure with these legal situations. In other cultures, when the entire economic future of your kinship groups, whether you are in a matrilineal society or a patrilineal society, depends on agreement through the generations, then uniting the generations periodically as we descend in time, uniting the generations through cross-cousin marriages here and there is like renewing your handshake, renewing your signature on a contract for a business partnership of sorts. So for instance, if you have, let's say we're in an economic system where there's ownership of property. Let's say that I have an enormous area of land and there is a natural spring on it, so constantly there's a source of fresh water. But I don't have a very large herd of cows. You and your kinship group has an enormous herd of cows and you have access to land, but you always have this problem of not enough access to fresh water during the dry season. Does anybody see immediately the benefit that would come from maybe a business partnership between our two kinship groups? Bingo, I can share in the wealth of the herd, and bingo, we can grow your herd even bigger because now we have an unlimited supply of water, which is a key ingredient to animal husbandry that needs to go on, right? In a culture where there is not LegalZoom.com, where we can download the limited liability partnership, which is everywhere. You know, we're very unusual to be, you know, to have access to those kind of westernized type things. But in a culture where LegalZoom.com does not exist, and we can't enter into this business partnership and just agree on terms, we get together, we're the mamas and the papas, who get together and decide which one of our descendants, which ones of our descendants are most likely to be able to forge a permanent union between your kinship group and my kinship group. Maybe it's a patrilineage. So I don't mean to imply that my daughter will become a member of your patrilineage, no. But she will be the catalyst for your patrilineage to have more members, right? She'll, through all of the sons that this particular girl is going to have for your particular son, all of these sons are going to carry on this business arrangement throughout time. So long after we're gone, they're going to have a family history of this arranged marriage meant the merger of our assets, so to speak, although that word doesn't really exist everywhere. And later on, maybe their grandchildren are going to also have arranged marriages that bring in other members of those same two kinship groups to renew the contract, generation after generation after generation, renew that partnership.
So what happens then if you don't produce boys?
Boo-hoo-hoo.
Off with their head.
Yeah.
Which,
Yeah. How do I answer this question concisely? I just can't answer this question. What happens if she doesn't produce boys? You asked about divorce. A lot of times divorce will take place. Gosh, where do I start with this? Okay, this was supposed to be toward the end of today's lecture, but let me go ahead and start with this. So there is an exchange process. So there is something called a bridal exchange. Excuse me. Okay, lots of different forms of bridal exchange. We might be very familiar with one of the forms that's discussed in our book. Have you heard the term dowry before? Yeah, so what's a dowry? This is something that's not entirely foreign to our cultural history. What's a dowry?
It's the money that your father gives you.
Gives to whom?
The daughter.
The bride, the one who's going to get married, right? So the dowry is the wealth that a daughter has for herself that she brings into the marriage, right? So wealth, and that is, I'm using this word, it could be wealth in the form literally of money, it could be valuable property, it could be useful property to set up a home. Any of these kinds of things would be considered dowry. So it's wealth that a bride's family, you said father, but a bride's family gives to the bride, and the bride collects over her lifetime for the specific purpose of using it and having it to fall back on during her marriage, okay? Well, that a bride's family accumulates for her, there are two ends and accumulates, for use during her marriage. Are there two M's and accumulates? No.
I don't think so.
Is there not?
Is there?
No. It's not two M's. Really? What's wrong with me?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
Is it in this culture and another one that I heard when it comes to that, to where it's like your father-in-law or your soon-to-be father-in-law is the one that pays for everything, the marriage, the thing, and all that?
That's a different thing. There are two other forms of bridal exchange. One of them is called a bride, well, it used to be called bride price, but now we use the word bride wealth. And then another one is called bride service. Okay, and so the one you're talking about is called bride price or bride wealth. Either one of those words mean the same thing. Some people have an argument, kind of a moral argument against this word price because it sounds like slavery, doesn't it? Sound like you're buying somebody? Which, you know, we don't need to start the argument about how maybe that's exactly what a wife is. But anyways, it sounds like slavery, right? So, but bride price is what you're talking about. This is where the groom's family bestows all kinds of gifts on the bride's family, not the bride, but the bride's family in exchange for her. Okay. Bride price. So yes, it's not necessarily the groom himself, although he would have, is that what, I think you mentioned the groom himself or the groom's father.
Yeah, the groom's
So it's not
father-in-law, but it's the same
Yeah,
thing.
so it's the groom's family or the groom's bloodline. So whoever the key pater is, right? Whoever that key person is, these are the people who bestow gifts to the bride's family in exchange for her. So we use this bride wealth thing because if I have a daughter who it's time to for her to be wed, and I have let me say 2 or 3 people in the community fighting over her, then maybe I'm going to make my decision on who she weds based on how large your gifts are in exchange for her. And as a matter of fact, this happened a couple years ago. I think maybe it was summer 2012. There was this big uproar in the international human rights community because the Maasai, who we've mentioned a couple times, they're pastoralists in Kenya and Tanzania in East Africa. We're going to watch a movie about them after spring break. Anyway, there were these grandmothers, okay? So the maiders in this particular culture were in charge of arranging their granddaughters' weddings. And there were these 2 girls who were, just in their teenage years who were ready to be wed. And both of these grandmothers had decided that their granddaughters were the most fertile women. They were fertile with boys. They were the hardest working. They were the most beautiful, the most attractive. They had the most talent. Like, not only were they hardworking, but they could make the most beautiful jewelry and they could make the most wonderful food, and they could, they had all of these wonderful attributes that no man or no other kinship group could deny. So she's going to bring a very high bride price or bride wealth. And so there was literally a bidding war going on between these two granddaughters. And the international community got wind of it, and it sounded just like a slave auction. But it came down to the number of cows that could have been exchanged for her. Because remember, the Maasai are pastoral people. And the economic decision to arrange the marriage was based on how many cows can you provide to my kinship group's herd in order to get my wonderful granddaughter who's so fertile and so hardworking and so talented and so beautiful and all these wonderful attributes. And if I remember correctly, one of the grandmothers got like 86 cows, which was unprecedented in Maasai history. By the way, got like 86 cows for the granddaughter, and then the other grandmother was, talked about, how her daughter would just remain unmarried until she could get at least 90 cows or something. I can't remember how the story ended, but yeah. So it was that's an example of bride price or bride wealth. It is not a slave auction. It is not selling, selling a person to another group, but it's an exchange system, just like we exchange rings.
They want get a price for what they wanted.
It's settling. It's the economic decision, and in this case, it's an exchange. I have this valuable person who is going to bring wonderful things to my kinship group if I keep her. So if you want her, you better bring just as equally wonderful things to my kinship group in exchange for her.
It's like nowadays, it's when a man's gonna marry a woman or whatnot. Like sometimes the parents get involved because maybe he's from a different, like a low income family, or doesn't go to college, or can't bring like a good degree to the table or something like that. It's like
A rich family, poor family.
In those kinds of cases, you mean like in this culture?
Yeah.
Yes, even those economic decisions are.
Yeah, they base it on like, what college did you go to? What degree do you have? What could you provide for my daughter?
What kind of, yes, do you have a 401k? All these kinds of questions, right? Absolutely, yes. How are you going to support the family that you all are going to have together? Because there's always that assumption that there's going to be children to care for in the future, right? I thought that you were getting close to what this other one is. This is bride service. That's SERV right there. So bride service. This is work that a groom does, a groom or members of a groom's family in some cases, does work for a period of time for the bride's family in exchange for her. So instead of goods being offered, it's literally work, okay?
I'd rather do that.
Work done for a period of time. Okay, and I have to be really general with this word period of time because there's not a specific period of time. Bride service is practiced all over the world, and in some places it's 3 months, in some places it's 5 years, in some places it is until the first son is born. It just depends, okay? So it's work done for a period of time that the groom does for the bride's family. Not for the bride, but for the bride's family. Somebody, I think it's in my other class, is doing a research paper on the Tiwi of in Darwin Island, off the coast of Australia, and the Tiwi have bride service. The Tiwi have bride service for like 3 decades. It's a really, really long time. They're the culture, I think I told you that as soon as a woman finds out that she's pregnant, they arrange a marriage for the unborn baby right then and there and marry the baby immediately. And then when the baby's born, if it's a boy, they're just like, oh, okay, you're not really married. We'll just stand by. We'll get you the next pregnancy, right? So if you were the groom, okay, you're off the hook this time, but the next pregnancy, you'll be the one, right? And so these arranged marriages happen. It doesn't mean that like the husband takes possession of the female child when the child is born, but it does mean that the mother-in-law and the son-in-law have a working relationship, bride service relationship, until at which time the child is old enough to go become his wife, to go serve as his wife, so to speak, in your household or whatever.
Isn't there like a Bible story where a man had to work for like 7 years to marry like a sister or something, and then he got the wrong sister, so then he had to work another 7 years to get the other one?
Does anybody know that Bible story? I'm not good with my Bible stories. Which is it's I guess something I need to brush up on, being in the Bible Belt. But no, that sounds very like a Bible story. And as a matter of fact, we'll talk about marriage patterns in just a second that do fit the Bible story. So anyway, I jumped to this bridal exchange thing because you asked what happens if she doesn't have a son. Okay, sons are vitally important. If she doesn't have a son and she comes from a dowry system, the dowry system gives her social worth. Because I brought all of my stuff to this wedding, I brought all of my stuff to this marriage. Maybe it's silver coins, so it literally has intrinsic value. Or maybe it's a bunch of housewares that I have, so everything that we use inside the house is my furniture and my dishes and my silverware or something. So whatever it is that I had in my dowry, it is mine. And so if, for some reason, you're unhappy with me, I have not produced you sons, I haven't produced you any children whatsoever, but the only child I have produced is a female, maybe. And then now I'm not pregnant, or I get married, or I get pregnant and I have another female. So if you're unhappy with me, it's not just you divorcing me, it's your entire kinship group who's going to make that decision. And it can come down to that. You failed to have sons, and therefore we don't want you anymore. The dowry would give me the ability to come back to my family and actually offer some kind of monetary assistance to them to take care of me for the rest of my life. Because probably my marriage life is over. He's not going to take a chance on me. He's seen that I haven't produced sons for you. Why should I produce sons for him, right? So, yeah, or in the bride wealth situation, the exchange has taken place, and so in order for the family to take her back, some of the wealth would have to be transferred back. But not all, because now I've got to feed and clothe her for the rest of her life. She might add, elbow grease or, actually manpower back to my kinship group, but she's a woman. She has no social worth without the ability to have sons. She's failed to do that. I'm keeping some of this bride wealth in order to pay for her upkeep, and you can have it back because you need to find bride, have the rest of it back. You're going to find a bride for, who can have sons for whoever you're marrying her to. And the last one, bride service. Bride service, it typically happens before, there's nothing to give back because it's literally work that's being done. And so a lot of times it's 2 or 3 months before the wedding takes place that you've fulfilled your debt to the family. And the idea is that you're taking one of our laborers away from us. And so she's going to benefit your kinship group with the labor she brings to it. And so you better make up for that in advance. And so there's really nothing to exchange back, but women have a slightly higher social value in that case with the bride service, because you're seen as, I'm going to lose something from my kinship group if I marry one of my daughters off. I've lost that work input. And so see, it's still all about the economics of the situation. All about the economics of the situation. But you better have sons.
Was there a specific definition for bridal exchange, or was it just that we had the three
No,
different?
bridal exchange is any of those three types of things where there are literally goods and services that are swapped. And we have that in this culture too. We have that in this culture too. We have all kinds of courtship gifts. We have an engagement ring. We have a bridal shower. We have all kinds of, we have, the exchange of rings, and they're not rings from Cracker Jack boxes, right? We have the exchange of rings, when the marriage takes place in our culture also. Okay, any questions or comments or anything? Now let's talk about something that you all have asked me many questions about individually. This word. Polygamy. Heard of that word before?
Yay.
Who knows the definition of it?
That's where the husband has more than one wife.
That's one type of polygamy.
Oh, that's right.
It's multiple spouses, yes. This means multiple, and anytime you see this in word here, we're talking about marriage. For instance, in the United States, and in lots of other places, we have something called monogamy. Now, you and I tend to use this word to mean exclusive sexual relationship, but literally this word means one set of marriage partners, okay? So in polygamy, this is one spouse of one sex with multiple spouses of the opposite sex simultaneously.
Saddam Hussein.
Probably, I don't know anything about his.
Yeah.
Okay, so one spouse of one sex with multiple spouses of the opposite sex simultaneously.
We throw a wrench in there, can it not be the same sex?
That is called something else.
That is called freaky.
No, that's not the anthropological term.
In some states, you can legally marry more than one person up in the northern part of some states.
Two spouses at a time, and only two spouses. No more is what monogamy is. Okay? Now, before we get into the different types of polygamy, because Ian said, oh, that's where a man has more than one wife. Well, that's one type of polygamy, but there is another type also. And typically, it's economic decisions that end up, setting a cultural practice of what type of polygamy your society has or does not have. But first, let's talk about monogamy, and you tell me how we would draw monogamy with our little kinship symbols. How do we do that?
One triangle, each way.
One triangle.
Oh, yeah, one triangle, circle.
Okay, so a triangle equals this, a circle. Equal symbol means marriage. I know we're saying equals, but yeah, so the triangle is male, the equal symbol represents a marriage, and the circle is a female. So look at this definition of monogamy. Have we covered it?
No.
Have we covered it with this one picture?
No.
What are the way the other pictures need to look?
A circle equal to a circle, and a triangle equal to a triangle.
Here is another way, and here is yet another way. Yes, all of these pictures are pictures of monogamous relationships according to this definition, okay? We leave this definition very general because all three of these forms of monogamy are found all over the world. And this form and this form are not new. I know a lot of us in the United States think of this form and this form as like a hot button political issue or something. Not so. Around the world for centuries and millennia, these kinds of relationships have been commonplace. They are not the most common type, but they are not unheard of at all, and it's very commonly approved of in lots of cultures around the world. So yeah, in order to be accurate with monogamy, since we have two spouses at a time and only two spouses, all three of these pictures fit monogamy. Okay?
Isn't it legal in like the northern states to have like 2 or 3 more wives? I've heard of people having like 2 or 3 wives.
Utah.
Oh, you mean, well yeah,
Like
we're
the
gonna talk
one-
about
Yeah.
that. Actually, no, there is no group in the United States. First of all, the United States is one of those places in the world that marriage is a legal situation. And so in the United States, the only legally recognized marriages are monogamous ones, okay? Typically, this is the monogamous one that is universally recognized. These monogamous relationships are becoming universally recognized, right? As legal situations in the United States also. But around the world, this is not something that needs to be settled with legislation or social commentary or anything. It's just been part of the social schema around the world forever, literally. Okay? Yeah. So, yes, this is what we have in the United States, and so most of the marriages that we've drawn on the board so far with the with all the kinship groups that we've done have represented monogamous relationships. So even when we did the Brady Bunch the other day, those were monogamous relationships. We ended one of those monogamous relationships with the death of a spouse. We ended another monogamous relationship with a divorce, and then we united the 2 leftover people in in a monogamous relationship, right? So accepted practice it's actually more than 80% of the world's cultures. It's accepted, that doesn't mean it's actually practiced, because there are some economic considerations that you have to make before you would actually take advantage of a polygamous relationship based on whichever type your society approves of. Okay, so there are 2 types of polygamy. We've left out specifics about the sex of these individuals, and so we need to differentiate between those 2 things here. So the most common type that Americans know about is something called polygyny. Polygyny, literally this word means multiple women, okay? Polygyny is a man with multiple wives simultaneously. Ma'am.
Why is that not bigamy?
Okay, good question. So in the United States, we are focused on the legal arrangement of marriage. In the United States, the legality of marriage brings many benefits to people. Bigamy is a situation in the United States that is illegal here. Bigamy is a specific legal situation where my husband has attempted to be legally married to me, and he has attempted to be legally married to you in 2 or 3 states over, and keep us unaware of the situation, and keep the authorities unaware, and keep all this, because of all the different kinds of legal benefits that marriage allows. Bigamy is illegal in the United States.
So if it's known by the other wives, and it is in the same state, then therefore it's legal?
No. In the United States, under no circumstances is polygyny a legal situation.
Okay.
No, we only allow in the United States one spouse of one sex and another spouse of the opposite sex, or actually,
So what country
soon
is
to be same-sex marriage everywhere, right?
Okay.
And that's the only legal situation that we allow. Okay. Now you can have a show on TV. Is that what you said?
What country is this showing?
Yes.
Sister
Yeah, like-
Wives?
Well, no, the show, okay, so, I thought you said something about the TV show. Okay, so, there is nothing stopping a group of nothing in the United States legal system to stop a group of adults from calling each other husband and wife if they want to. But you're talking about the show Sister Wives, right? Is that still on TV? Okay, I have seen this like maybe twice. So if I remember correctly, this guy on Sister Wives is legally married to one of those women. She's the one with one daughter. Do you watch it regularly?
No. I think I watched it like twice.
He's legally married to one of those women. The other women, I think there's 3 other women, and they all live like in the same household with all of their offspring, right? The 3 other women also call themselves wives. The first wife calls them a wife of the same husband. They've had some kind of party or some kind of, informal ceremony that was called a wedding, but there's nothing legal about it. There was no marriage practitioner in Colorado, wherever they live. I don't know where they live. Anyway, there was no person who said, by the laws vested in me by the state of Colorado, I pronounce you man and second wife. No, because that doesn't exist in our legal code. But you can have 6 men living in your household with you if you want to, and they can all call you wife, and you can all call them husband if y'all want to. You're consenting adults. But remember, we had that definition of marriage on the board that said it's culturally defined. It's a union that the culture defines as a marriage. Does our culture define that as a marriage, if that's the way her home is designed? No. Just like our culture doesn't call this guy with the show Sister Wives a marriage. And he has a lot of legal issues to deal with the offspring from those women who are not legally his wife. Those offspring are at a significant disadvantage to the one who was produced from the legal marriage. And so yeah, it's a little confusing for us because we see maybe evidence of this kind of thing, but this is, a Hollywood mock-up kind of thing. People can do anything they want in the privacy of their own, call wife and husband all day long. Doesn't make you wife and husband in a legal sense, right? Okay, so polygyny, if we are familiar at all with the word polygamy, typically this type pops into our mind. But there is another type of polygamy also, and that is called polyandry. Polyandry is a woman with multiple husbands simultaneously. And I'm going to run out of room for the word simultaneously, but yes, a woman with multiple husbands simultaneously. So remember, when you hear the word polygamy, it's two types. You have to leave it really general, gender non-specific at the beginning, and then break it down into these 2 different types. Who wants to draw them? Who wants to draw? Yes, sir.
Does polyandry?
Polyandry?
Yeah. Is that more typical in like a matrilineal descent system?
I'm not sure whether that has a correlation to matrilineages, but the examples that I know of for polyandry have a direct correlation to extremely impoverished situations in a culture. So in cultures that have low food resources, low resources in general, polyandry tends to be a cultural response to that. In particular, polyandry you will find practiced in places where female infanticide is also practiced. Have we talked about that at all? Okay, well let's just start with the word infanticide. Here's that word that I said in case you didn't know how to spell it when I said it. So whenever you end something like homicide or suicide or anything like that, what does it mean? Death. So what do you suppose this word means?
Killing a baby?
Yes. So infanticide is killing infants either at birth or through neglect, in their early months, okay? So intentional killing of babies. Infanticide. And it could literally, be an intentional swift death or just slowly from neglect over time. Typically, when we talk about infanticide throughout the world, you don't just talk, you can say the word infanticide, but people who have studied it a lot know that you are talking about something that's really called female infanticide, gender selective infanticide, and it's the females who get killed. In a culture where female offspring are ritualistically or routinely killed or neglected until they die, not very many females make it to adulthood, in this case. And lots of males make it to adulthood. So if a normal guy wants a wife, guess what? He's going to have to share her, right? So a lot of times, polyandry might be in response to the fact that female infanticide is practiced very commonly. But typically, female infanticide is only practiced in severe impoverished situations. Because if we have limited food resources and I'm pregnant, I have to take more food resources than I would if I wasn't pregnant. And then the baby is a female, I have taken more food resources to produce this female. If I'm going to keep her alive, I have to continue taking more food resources to produce enough milk to keep her alive. So I still have to eat for two, so to speak, because there's not a Kmart on the corner where you can go buy Infamil, right? It's me and my milk that supports her. So typically, if females aren't valued except for your ability to have a son, then female offspring would be killed or neglected to the point of death to give me quicker recovery time to have another pregnancy.
So,
To get me healthier, to be able to support another pregnancy, because now we have another 50-50 chance that it's a boy this next time. And so maybe I have 3 females, 1, 2, 3, my first 3 kids are all females. Well, we're either going to kill them or neglect them to the point of death so that I can recover quickly enough. And then on number 4, it's a son. It's a son. We're going to do everything we possibly can to keep this baby alive. So I'm going to, all of the food resources that I need, they are mine, honey, because I need to keep myself healthy and keep this baby healthy, right? And then, so I produce, as much milk as I possibly can. I fatten him up. I, cater to him as much as I can. Then, after it's a pretty sure thing that he's going to survive, then I continue to get food resources for myself so I can get healthy enough to have another pregnancy. And hopefully it's a boy again. And maybe after I've had 3 or 4 boys, because boys are my social security. Boys are my social security. After I've had 2 or 3 boys who have lived comfortably long enough for me to feel like, oh, they're going to survive, then maybe if the 4th, maybe I'm on my 8th pregnancy, but maybe finally I've got a pregnancy where a girl is produced where I'll pay attention to her. And I won't neglect her to the point of death because I've got these 3 boys already and they're okay. So now I can pay attention to this girl. So it's all about economics. So let's draw this. Okay, so in the case here, the example here that I'm showing is a way to show a female. This is a wife with 3 spouses, okay? So there are 4 spouses pictured here, 3 of the same sex and 1 of the opposite sex, right? So this is 4 spouses. 4 spouses pictured. Now, in the case that I'll tell you about, we're going to look at a case in Tibet where they have fraternal polyandry. Who knows what the word fraternal means? Fraternal polyandry, it means a brother. Okay. Remember when we learned what parallel cousins and cross cousins are? What did I tell you that the closest English word to parallel cousin is? Sibling. So here when we say brother, fraternal polyandry means brother. These people might be 100% full brothers to each other, or they might be what you and I call half brothers to each other, or they might be what you and I call first cousins to each other. But in their society, they're considered brothers. They've grown up in the same household. Okay? So in this case, if these brothers have grown up in the same household and they come from extreme poverty, it doesn't really make sense for them to take an inheritance from their parents and break up a small inheritance from the get-go into 3 smaller inheritances and go off and try to keep house someplace with 3 different women. This woman can only have as many babies in her reproductive lifetime as she can, and 3 wives would have 3 times as many babies. So these 3 brothers, which may or may not be parallel cousins, half or full brothers to each other, will share this wife. And whatever offspring that are produced from this union, maybe, let me see, maybe there was a girl, maybe there was another girl, maybe there was a boy, maybe there was a boy, maybe another boy, and then a girl. Any offspring that are produced from this union, who is the genitor to these babies? Who's the genitor?
All of them.
Is it clear from this picture?
No.
It's not clear from this picture. Your answer is right. All of them are considered the genitor, but who's the pater? All of them, right? So these kids have a mom and 3 dads, basically. And does it really matter in a system where parallel cousins are considered to be siblings, does it really matter who the genitor and pater is? No, because they're siblings anyway. Does that make sense? You're frowning. You're good? Okay, I know it's confusing. But yeah, so
How do you show like the generation above that? If that's how you show 3 husbands?
it wouldn't be one continuous kinship diagram. You would have this as like a pop out, and you could show their relationship through a different kinship diagram. So you could show actually, was this person actually Ego and Ego's father, and is this person the offspring of Ego's father's brother, and is this person the offspring of Ego's grandfather's brothers? So, you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So all these people would have been reared in the same household, considered siblings, feel like siblings to each other. But to you and me, they might not have that blood connection that we define as sibling in our culture. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So would they all call each one of them dad or whatever?
Sure, if that's the term that exists in
Well,
their
you know,
culture,
yeah.
right? Yes, yeah. So, yeah, dad, every single one of them is dad, every single one of them is junior, so to speak, right? Okay, so here's an example. Remember, this is 4 spouses. It's 3 husbands and a wife. That's 4 spouses total, right? Questions? Okay, you look like you have another question, but you don't. Okay, all right. Who wants to draw polygyny?
Seems like it would be a nightmare doing a kinship chart.
You have to have a lot of pop outs, unless you have only just like 2 wives or something, 2 husbands or something. It's pretty easy because you can do it linearly. But okay, so let's do an example of polygyny. How many spouses do you want there to be?
Don't give a number.
Don't give it. Okay, so 4 spouses total. Okay, so this is polygyny this time, and so the one spouse of one sex is this, and then here are the other spouses. Here's 4 spouses total. Did you mean 4 wives? Then that would show, this would be 4 wives, that would show the, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so in this kind of case, yes, this shows the simultaneous marriage of this man with these 4 women all at once. Now when I say simultaneous, he probably didn't take all of these wives all at once. Like for instance, I think we have like 5 minutes left. If we look at the rules for polygyny that exist in the religion called Islam, the rules for polygyny are that a man can take a wife, and when that man has the economic capacity to take a second wife and his first wife agrees, then he can take a second wife. And the economic capacity here, the rule is that the man has to be able to provide exactly the same lifestyle, exactly the same living arrangement for the second wife that he did his first wife. And so typically that means move into the same house in an equal sized bedroom down the hall from each other. Typically, would be what that would mean. Then if a man wants to take a third wife, okay, the same rules apply. You have to have the financial means to take the third wife and provide her with the same exact living arrangement, and wife number 1 and wife number 2 have to agree to it. The same situation for the 4th, but Islam places a cap on it at the 4th. So there can be 5 spouses and 5 spouses at once. And in this case, for the kinship charts, you would like identify which was the first wife, and what you would like have little pop outs. So here's the man with wife number 1, and this is the kids that they had, right? This is all the kids that they had. And then here's the same guy with wife number 2, and you would identify that to see whose kids came from what sexual union, right? But if this is wife number 1, you better believe there's a hierarchy and a position in the household, and the children also. This would be firstborn. So there's no firstborn for each union. There'd be a firstborn period. And this guy better be a son.
What if they didn't produce any children in the first marriage?
That would be another reason why the first wife would agree to the second wife to begin with, right? And bring that person in.
So, but the first wife would still be in charge over the others, even when it comes to
Maybe
those
not.
kids.
Not when this one starts producing kids. When this one starts producing kids, move over, first wife, I got everything on you, right?
She takes precedent because she can.
Yes, the
produce
child production, particularly sons, that's a woman's social value most places in the world. Most definitely. We good? Questions? Do you think you could draw some of these if I gave you a scenario of like, this person has this wife and this divorce or this addition or multiple spouses or all that kind of stuff? Think so? Okay, good. Well, that's what we're going to do most of the time in class on Wednesday. We'll tie up any loose ends that we have, but I'm going to bring these big sheets of paper with some markers and stuff, and I'm going to give you a scenario of a lineage, and it's going to talk about ego and how many siblings ego has and how many siblings ego's parents have on both sides, and you'll have to work in small groups and figure out, agree on what the kinship diagram would look like.